Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I returned to my remote mountain cabin after a year abroad, only to find strangers sipping wine on my couch, a spa where my shed once stood, and my entire life turned into a luxury rental by the local HOA. They thought I was gone for good. They were wrong, and I came back with receipts. I hadn't seen my mountain cabin in over 13 months. After a full circumnavigation of the globe on a motorcycle, 2 busted ribs in Laos, dengue fever in Java, and a passport soaked in Himalayan rain, I was ready for nothing more than a familiar view, hot coffee, and the silence of 5 forested acres in Colorado. My last real sanctuary, home. The moment I turned off the main road toward my property, something felt wrong. The old dirt path I'd carved years ago had been replaced by a professionally laid gravel road, straight even and completely out of character. Neat wooden signs pointed the way, reading Mount Haven Retreat Guest Parking. At first, I thought I took a wrong turn. Then I saw the tall pines that lined my land. Unmistakable. I stopped the bike, my stomach twisted. I rolled forward slowly, the gravel crunching beneath my wheels like it didn't belong here, because it didn't. Ahead, a small wooden arch stood at the base of the hill, carved with the words Mount Haven Retreat, a signature stay, by Alpine Bluff HOA. HOA? That made no goddamn sense. My land was explicitly outside the HOA boundary. That was the whole reason I built here. Climbing the last stretch, I felt like I'd entered a theme park version of my own house. My handcrafted log cabin was still there. But wrong. The rustic timber facade had been pressure washed and stained in a glossy modern finish. My vintage double-hung windows had been replaced with sleek, black-framed floor-to-ceiling panes. The front porch now had a laminated sign welcoming guests, and someone had installed a plastic prefab sauna next to the shed. But it wasn't until I turned the corner into the backyard that I truly froze. A banner hung between 2 poles, flapping in the mountain wind. Thank you, Alpine Bluff HOA, for extending our lease. The Parkers, NY. I killed the engine, dismounted. My legs felt unsteady. The air smelled of citronella and cedarwood-scented candles. Lawn chairs had been arranged in a semicircle. A Bluetooth speaker played soft ambient music, and in the kitchen window, I saw movement. I pushed open the door I built with my own hands and walked into someone else's life. There were 2 people inside, a middle-aged couple dressed in Patagonia fleece and sipping wine on the couch that was not mine. The walls had been painted a soft beige, my books and photographs replaced with bland artwork of mountain lakes and inspirational quotes. The man looked up with surprise, wine halfway to his lips. Can we help you?" he said. "I live here," I replied, blunt as a hammer. The woman stood. "I think you have the wrong house. This is a vacation rental through Mount Haven. We booked it online. The code worked fine." "What code?" I asked. "The one the HOA gave us," she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I took a slow breath. My old oak table was gone. My grandfather's clock vanished. The hand-carved kitchen island had been ripped out and replaced with some marble-look IKEA imitation. Every trace of me had been erased. I looked toward the back wall, where a portrait of my dog had once hung. It wasn't there. The dog was gone. I felt my hands ball into fists. "I'm calling the sheriff," I said. They didn't argue. I don't think they even knew what to say. While I stepped outside to make the call, they whispered inside, confusion giving way to worry. I told dispatch that I was the legal property owner, that my house had been unlawfully occupied and modified, and that I needed an officer here, now. 15 minutes later, a patrol SUV pulled up. Deputy Rowley. I remembered him from a 4th of July BBQ in town. He stepped out and looked at me, then at the banner, then at the sauna. "Jesus, Milo," he said. "You renting this out now?" "No," I said flatly. "I've been in Asia for over a year. This is my house. I never authorized this. I didn't even know it was happening." He adjusted his hat and let out a slow whistle. "Okay. We'll sort this out." Inside, the couple handed over their booking confirmation, a professional-looking reservation page with photos of my property under the brand Mount Haven Retreat. It even included an HOA welcome packet with rules, check-in times, and an emergency contact number. Karen Sargent, President, Alpine Bluff HOA. I nearly laughed, but I couldn't, because that name hit me like a gut punch. Karen. I remembered her. She once tried to fine me for leaving tire tracks near the trailhead that bordered her subdivision. She had no authority, of course, and I told her that. But now she had apparently taken full possession of my home and turned it into a damn income stream. I looked out over my own land and felt a rage I hadn't known in years. They'd erased me. My life, my history, my rights, paved over and converted into a weekend getaway for people from New York. And someone was about to pay for it. The next morning, I returned with copies of my deed, title history, and every legal document that proved this land had never, not once, been under the control of Alpine Bluff HOA. The sheriff's office opened a file, but I already knew I needed more than local law to sort this out. The situation smelled too organized, too deliberate. At exactly 9:05, a black Lexus SUV pulled into my driveway like it owned the place. Out stepped Karen Sargent. Same pastel cardigan, same surgically fixed smile, same dead shark eyes. She looked around like she was touring her own property, and she had the audacity to wave at me. "Good morning," she said, as if we'd planned a brunch. "You must be Milo." "I must be," I said. She stepped forward, holding a clipboard with a stack of neatly arranged papers. "I heard about the confusion yesterday. Unfortunate. But this was all done by procedure. When your property was observed to be abandoned for an extended period, we followed Alpine Bluff's civic abandonment guidelines. The community had no choice but to take provisional oversight." "Civic what?" "It's all outlined here." She held up a printed resolution titled Emergency Custodial Oversight, Property 477 North Ridge. It was dated almost 11 months ago. "We held an emergency vote. It was unanimous." I took the paper and scanned it. Every signature looked printed. No handwriting. The dates didn't align with anything. And then I saw the kicker. A signed consent to manage form, supposedly from a man named Samuel Jennings. My father died in 2013. "This is forged," I said coldly. "We believed it to be accurate," she replied, tilting her head like a disappointed teacher. The records indicated lack of contact, no communication, and, well, silence is often the same as consent. "That's not how law works." Karen smiled. "It's how stewardship works. The HOA has acted in good faith. Guests have come and gone. Your property has been well maintained, improved even. You should be grateful." Grateful. Before I could reply, a golf cart pulled up with two men in polo shirts. They were apparently part of the HOA Property Access Task Force and had arrived to ensure smooth transition of use. They carried clipboards, matching name tags, and one of them even had a leveler in hand like he was going to inspect something. I had to laugh, and then stop myself from punching one of them in the teeth. "You have 30 seconds, I said, "to get off my land." One of them looked startled. "Sir, we're here under HOA authority." "You're here under nothing. This is private property. My name's on the deed. Not yours, not hers. Not your lawn care mafia." Karen's eyes narrowed slightly. "If you insist on using forceful language, Mr. Jennings, we may need to pursue a legal remedy." "Good," I said. "Do that, please. I can't wait." The men retreated slowly, muttering to each other. Karen lingered a moment longer, like she was still calculating a way to flip the chessboard in her favor. "We'll be in touch," she said, almost sweetly. "You already were," I muttered, watching her leave. That night, I drove into the nearest town and sat down with two people I trusted more than any HOA rep with a clipboard. My lawyer, Camille Reed, and a local private investigator, Ian Mendoza, who handled messy property disputes like this for breakfast. Camille was already furious before I finished explaining. "They filed a bogus custodial claim," she said, flipping through the documents I brought. "That's not even a real category under state law. It's fabricated HOA garbage." Ian, meanwhile, had pulled up a website on his tablet. There it was, MountHavenRetreat.com, glossy and professional, showcasing my home under signature mountain escapes. The calendar showed it was booked most weekends for the past year. "Damn," he said. "You've been a top-tier rental and didn't even know it." He tapped through the pages, rates, reviews, policies, and found the name Alpine Lifestyle, LLC, listed in the legal footer. That's when Camille froze. "Wait, that's Karen's shell company," she said. "I ran into that name before in a zoning scam last year. She uses it to launder HOA funds through side deals. My cabin, my home, had become part of a criminal rental racket. And Karen, prim, smiling, malicious Karen, had built the whole operation around it." I leaned back in my chair. Time to flip the script. Camille grinned. Ian nodded. We'll dig. And I'll go undercover, he said. But you should too. They already think you're out of the picture. Let's use that. I smiled for the first time that day. Yeah, let's use that. 2 days later, I became a guest in my own damn home. It was Ian's idea. He said they were still listing the place for weekend stays, and it just so happened that an open slot appeared after I kicked the Parkers out. Camille booked the reservation under a fake name using a prepaid card. I shaved my beard, wore tinted glasses, and swapped my motorcycle jacket for a puffy tourist vest. They didn't recognize me at the gate. When I arrived, a young guy with a clipboard and an HOA branded fleece met me in the driveway. He introduced himself as Jonas, guest concierge for Alpine Lifestyle. His job apparently was to give me a tour of the property and explain the wellness amenities. The house, my house, had been restaged. Candles everywhere, mountain-themed wallpaper in the hall, and a laminated binder titled Welcome to Mount Haven, a curated escape. There was even a note on the fridge reminding guests to tag the property in photos using the hashtag Retreat on the Ridge. I nearly vomited. While Jonas yapped about the infrared sauna they'd bolted into the shed, I activated the pen camera Ian gave me. I walked the house filming everything. The modified fixtures, the altered layout, the new locks on what used to be my study. My military instincts kicked in. I documented methodically, collecting visual evidence while pretending to admire the Scandinavian ambiance. But it was in the kitchen that the mask started to slip. Question, I asked casually. Who manages all this? I'd love to recommend the place to a friend. Oh, we're run by Alpine Lifestyle, Jonas said. It's part of the HOA. They're the ones keeping this place so well maintained. So this belongs to the HOA? He hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Yes, this house was abandoned. They rescued it and made it usable again. Super ethical, you know? I smiled through my teeth. In the basement, I found the smoking gun. Literally, my fireproof storage locker, the one I'd bolted to the foundation, was wide open, empty. The documents were gone. My military medals vanished. In their place were yoga mats, storage bins, and a folded massage table. I didn't even know whether to scream or puke. Back upstairs, I asked Jonas about the booking process. Oh, we handle all that through Central. Guests pay Alpine Lifestyle directly. Then the HOA gets a portion for managing the retreat program. I repeated it for the camera later. Alpine Lifestyle LLC receives rental payments. HOA takes a cut. Property not owned by HOA. No consent from owner. When Jonas left, I called Ian from behind the shed. He was already in position, watching HOA staff come and go from a truck labeled Mount Haven Maintenance Division. He'd gotten plates. He'd identified employees. And he'd overheard them talking about restocking the other rental next door. They'd done this more than once. Camille was compiling the evidence as we spoke. Rental revenue statements. Fake meeting minutes. Public records showing my property listed as non-HOA since purchase. She also found out the most damning thing yet. Karen had been reporting the revenue as donor-supported wellness revenue in HOA financials, routing it through Alpine Lifestyle and omitting tax disclosures. Meanwhile, I dug through the trash bins on the edge of the property, and there they were, scraps of envelopes with my name on them, burned mail, the label from an old photo album, personal effects destroyed, my identity erased to make room for scented candles and bamboo towel racks. At midnight, Ian met me in the woods behind the ridge. We reviewed footage, cross-checked faces. One guy, a senior member of the HOA board, had been staying in my house every third weekend for free. Another, a supposed property inspector, had posted Instagram stories from my back deck months ago with the caption HOA perks. They thought I was never coming back. They bet on my absence. They sold my home to strangers, slept in my bed, and cashed in like it was a real estate startup. But I was back, and now I had receipts. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I spent the next day driving from one office to another like a man possessed. County recorder, property tax assessor, sheriff's substation. I carried copies of my title, land plat, photographs, footage, notarized declarations. Camille had compiled it into a brutal dossier, and by noon, it landed on the desk of the Colorado Division of Real Estate Fraud. By 3 p.m., I had a response. They took it seriously, like, bring in the marshals, serious. A federal agent from the Department of Housing and Urban Development called me within the hour. The moment he saw the shell company structure, the altered property use, and especially the forged HOA board minutes, he uttered 4 words I hadn't heard since the Army. This is organized fraud. The next morning, I was back on my ridge, standing beside a pair of stern-faced federal marshals and a real estate fraud investigator with a clipboard and mirrored sunglasses. They had an active warrant to inspect, document, and secure the premises. I was legally cleared to enter, reclaim, and secure my property, and remove all unauthorized additions. I didn't waste time. I kicked open the front door, not for the drama, but because the keypad had been changed again. Inside, it smelled like rosemary oil and sin. I tore down the Welcome to Mount Haven sign, ripped down their spa calendar from the wall, and threw every last lavender-scented eye mask into a garbage bag. The marshals photographed everything, every construction modification, every piece of amenity furniture, every trace of their scam. Outside, I took a crowbar to the plastic sauna that was bolted to my back deck. It came apart like a cheap toy. I dragged the broken panels down the hill and dumped them onto the HOA's pristine parking lot next to their office sign. A couple of staffers stared from the windows, stunned. Then I moved to the gravel trail they'd built through my trees. I had a rented skid steer waiting nearby. 1 hour later, the gravel was plowed into a mound and covered with brush. The spa trail was dead. They'd built a pergola without a permit. Down it went, a raised platform with yoga mats. Demolished. Decorative stone planters, sledgehammered and shoveled into trash bins. My land, my rules. Marshals watched, occasionally nodding. One of them even offered me a bottle of water. It took most of the afternoon. When I was done, the house looked wounded, but it looked like mine again. The fake aura of commercial retreat was gone, and as I stood on the front steps, muddy and bruised, I finally saw Karen. She arrived in a silver Range Rover, flanked by 2 HOA members still trying to dress like this was a business meeting. Her jaw dropped when she saw the wreckage of her little operation. "You're destroying community assets," she screamed. "No," I said. "I'm removing criminal trespass." "You'll pay for this?" "Funny, I was about to say the same to you." The marshals approached. One of them showed her the warrant and a list of fraud allegations under investigation. Her smugness cracked. For the first time since this started, she stopped talking. A neighbor came by on an ATV, an older guy named Earl who'd lived off-grid here since the 70s. He tipped his hat to me and said, "About damn time someone wrecked those yuppie sweat lodges." I couldn't help but laugh. That night, I finally locked my door, my actual key, not a keypad, not a fob, just the real old brass key I had in my backpack all along. I stood on my porch, drank a beer, and for the first time in a year, breathed my mountain air again. But it wasn't over. Now came the part Karen would truly regret. The day after the demolition, I filed the civil complaint. Camille drafted it in 3 hours flat, 62 pages of brutal precision. Charges: fraud, unlawful conversion, trespassing, willful destruction of personal property, impersonation of legal authority, and racketeering under Colorado revised statutes. She submitted the package to the county court and simultaneously to the U.S. Attorney's Office for potential federal action. The local news caught wind fast. HOA accused of running illegal retreat from private property, blared the headline on Channel 6. They showed a photo of me next to the rubble of the demolished spa deck, captioned, "Homeowner Strikes Back." I didn't ask for the spotlight, but at this point, I didn't mind it either. I wanted every HOA in the country to see what happens when they bet against the wrong mountain man. Ian's investigation continued. He tracked down bank transfers between Alpine Lifestyle LLC and a web of shell accounts, all registered to a single P.O. box in Glenwood Springs. One account directly funneled to Karen's personal consulting firm, KLS Solutions. We subpoenaed Airbnb, VRBO, and 2 niche luxury rental platforms. The records were devastating. 11 months of bookings, 128 separate guests. Total revenue, $192,000. Not 1 cent reported to me or to the IRS. Even worse, the guest reviews. They all thought this was a legitimate HOA-run retreat. Several noted how welcoming the HOA staff was, and complimented Karen, the lady who brought muffins. I wanted to puke. This woman played Martha Stewart while robbing me blind. Camille arranged depositions. One after another, guests confirmed the same story. They were told the house belonged to the HOA, had no idea it was privately owned, and paid via secure HOA portal. Most were horrified when they found out the truth. And then we got Ben, my so-called property steward. Camille got him to flip with a single subpoena and the threat of accessory charges. He showed up wearing a thrift store suit and sweating like a faucet. In his deposition, he admitted that Karen approached him shortly after I left. She offered him $4,000 and promised to relieve him of responsibility if he quietly handed over the key and said nothing. He took the deal. She said the HOA was reclaiming blighted properties, he mumbled. Said it was all legal. She even showed me a letter with your signature. That letter, of course, was fake. The signature was a pixelated scan from a DMV form I'd once submitted for a driver's license renewal. Camille had traced the image source. By the end of the week, we had a mountain of exhibits: forensic document analysis, payment records, emails between Karen and board members, statements from at least 6 HOA officials confirming they knew the house was not part of the association. I watched Karen in court as she sat beside her defense attorney, arms crossed, trying to look unbothered. But the cracks were there. She flinched when Ben testified. She scribbled furiously when one of the guests said, "I just assumed it was an HOA vacation home." At the next recess, Camille leaned over to me and said, "She's cooked. They just don't know it yet." And I believed her. Things started to spiral for Karen faster than I expected. 2 days after Ben's testimony, the court approved our motion for a forensic audit of Alpine Bluff HOA's finances for the last 3 years. We weren't just going after my property anymore. Camille wanted the full anatomy of the monster. That's when it all started unraveling. The audit found over $400,000 in undocumented wellness and infrastructure expenses, all routed through Alpine Lifestyle LLC. Most of it coincided with the so-called retreat period. Spa upgrades, furniture, marketing packages, security contractors, all billed from vendors that didn't exist. Or worse, vendors owned by Karen's relatives. A printer supply company tied to her cousin in Denver had provided signage and branding services. A landscaping firm out of Arizona billed $38,000 for decorative path enhancements, but didn't even have a valid license. The entire retreat was a laundering operation disguised as community investment. During deposition, Karen folded fast under pressure. At first, she kept up the act. I was misled. The board approved it. I thought it was abandoned. But Camille brought the hammer down. She pulled out an email Karen had sent to a fellow board member 6 months prior, gloating about the ROI from Mount Haven is finally justifying the stress. There was even a smiley face. Karen's lawyer physically pinched the bridge of his nose when that came out. We turned up more emails, messages between Karen and the rental platform agents, all using her personal address. She handled bookings directly. She even gave specific instructions about which guests could use the private jacuzzi and which ones to steer toward the forest hammocks. I hadn't even known I had forest hammocks. It didn't stop there. 2 members of the HOA board, a couple in their 60s named Lorraine and Art, walked into Camille's office voluntarily and gave statements. They admitted Karen pressured the board into voting unofficially to assume possession of my land, despite full knowledge it was outside the HOA boundaries. When some members hesitated, she threatened to report them for compliance obstruction. She said no one would ever come back to claim it, Art told us. Said the guy rode off to Africa or something. I guess that was me. Camille's class action grew. Other homeowners joined, filing claims that Karen had similarly tried to lease parts of their property lines for retreat usage, pressured them into landscaping upgrades, or charged them unexplained community enhancements fees. One elderly widow claimed Karen had been hosting candlelit yoga events on her porch without permission while she visited her grandkids. Karen's own board turned on her. They voted in an emergency session to remove her as president and offered full cooperation with the investigation. Not that it would save them all. Several had already signed false documents, approved fake invoices, and benefited from the operation. HOA Alpine Bluff was officially in freefall. The media dubbed it the Mountain Retreat Scam. Local radio called her the Queen of Stolen Cabins. A neighbor painted "Not HOA Property" on his shed in 6-foot red letters. Someone else started selling bumper stickers, "My land, not yours, Karen." And through it all, I stayed quiet. I kept rebuilding, fixing the walls, replacing the old furniture, scraping candle wax off my kitchen floor. I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration of my home, my name, and the line no one should ever cross again. The courtroom was packed, day 1 of the official trial, and it felt like the entire county had shown up to watch Karen Sargent's empire implode. Locals, reporters, homeowners, even a handful of tourists who'd unknowingly rented my house last year sat in the gallery, jaws clenched. I sat beside Camille, calm as a pond before a storm. Karen walked in wearing cream-colored business attire like it was just another HOA meeting. Her lawyer, now her third, shuffled a stack of motions and barely looked at her. The prosecution opened strong. They laid out the timeline like a map of war: acquisition of my keys, falsified board minutes, fraudulent filings, and over 100 bookings through Alpine Lifestyle, LLC. They put up transaction charts, emails, and photos of guests enjoying a home that never belonged to Karen. Then came the guest witnesses. A couple from Seattle took the stand first. They'd stayed in my cabin for a week in January. They testified they'd been told by a Mrs. Sergeant of the HOA that the cabin was a shared community-owned wellness site. The husband even produced an email in which Karen thanked him for respecting HOA guidelines. Camille's cross-examination was clinical. Do you remember seeing any personal photographs or items in the home? No, it looked more like a model house. Did you ever suspect the home was privately owned? No. Karen told us it had been repurposed from a vacant structure. Ben took the stand again, sweaty, nervous, honest. She showed me a document with a fake signature. I knew it was fake, but I took the money anyway. Who gave you the money? Karen Sargent. Did anyone else at the HOA suggest this plan? No, it was all her idea. The defense squirmed. Their only argument was implied community management authority. They claimed Karen believed she was doing the right thing for the neighborhood. But Camille destroyed that with one sentence. You were depositing rental profits into your private consulting firm. That's not community management. That's theft. Then she entered into evidence a spreadsheet, a ledger of payouts from Alpine Lifestyle LLC to KLS Solutions. It showed $192,000 in revenue and at least $138,000 routed directly to Karen's personal account. She blinked hard when that came up on the projector. The jury didn't. The final nail was a voicemail. Ian had found it in the backup logs of the HOA's own cloud system. It was Karen's voice, recorded late at night, talking to another board member. He's not coming back. If he does, we'll call it a mistake and deal with it. Until then, this house is earning us what dues never did. It played on speakers loud enough to rattle the walls. Karen's face went pale. Her lawyer stood up, requested a brief recess. The judge declined. Camille leaned toward me. That voicemail? That's the sound of her sentence writing itself. And then, in a moment I'll never forget, Karen finally cracked. She stood up, shouted something about a witch hunt and ungrateful neighbors, and had to be warned by the bailiff to sit down or be removed. That broke whatever spell of authority she thought she still had. From there, it wasn't a trial. It was a slow, thorough burial. 3 weeks later, the verdict came down. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. No one even pretended to be surprised. I was sitting in the same seat I'd occupied for every minute of testimony. Front row, arms crossed, staring straight ahead. Camille didn't blink once when the foreperson read the verdict. On all counts, guilty. Karen sat frozen, staring at the floor. Her lawyer just nodded, defeated. The judge wasted no time. The sentencing hearing was scheduled a week later, and that courtroom was packed even tighter. This time, though, there was no sympathy. Even her former allies sat behind the prosecution table wearing grim expressions. Karen Sargent, the judge began, you were entrusted with the responsibility of community leadership. Instead, you exploited a position of trust to enrich yourself through calculated fraud, deception, and outright theft. The evidence against you is not just overwhelming, it is grotesque. He listed the charges: wire fraud, real estate fraud, falsification of legal documents, criminal impersonation, racketeering. I'd seen some heavy sentences in my life, but when he pronounced it, 18 years in state prison, there was an audible gasp in the gallery. Karen didn't cry. She just stared straight ahead like it hadn't happened. But the mask was gone. 3 other HOA board members were sentenced as well. Lorraine and Art, the retirees who'd turned state's witness, received probation and heavy fines, but avoided jail. The treasurer got 6 years for knowingly processing payments through the fake vendor accounts. One smug board member who'd held yoga sessions in my backyard without my consent? 8 years, no parole. Then came the matter of restitution. Camille stood and presented the damage assessment: loss of property use, structural damage, stolen belongings, emotional distress, legal costs, and the illegal profits reaped. The number was staggering: $3.7 million. The court approved the entire amount. The funds would come from liquidation of HOA assets, seizure of Karen's personal holdings, and a special bond imposed on the Alpine Bluff Preserve as an entity. That's when the real shock came for the rest of the homeowners. The community's HOA insurance would not cover fraud. Half the neighborhood turned against the other half overnight. Lawsuits started flying. People who'd never spoken more than a good morning were now suing over assessments, misused dues, secret decisions, and board member backdoor deals. The HOA collapsed within days. By the end of the month, Alpine Bluff Preserve legally dissolved. The land management reverted to county oversight, and the local government passed an emergency ordinance blocking future HOA formation in the area without direct vote from every property owner. As for me, I got my house back, legally, permanently, and with a fat check coming once the court-appointed trustees sold off the last of Karen's wellness center furniture. One morning I stood on my porch with Camille and Ian drinking coffee and staring at the fresh sign I'd posted on the rebuilt front gate: private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. No retreats. No exceptions. Ian snorted. Think Karen will come back for one last muffin run? Camille smiled. Only if they serve him in prison. I finally exhaled. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure and making sure the next Karen thought twice before laying hands on something that didn't belong to her. The silence was the first thing I noticed. After a year of illegal guests, HOA threats, courtrooms, and noise, my cabin was finally silent again. No voices echoing through the trees. No strange cars crunching gravel on the path. Just the wind rustling the pines, the distant call of a hawk, and the sound of my boots on clean, dry earth. I'd spent the last few weeks hauling out what Karen and her crew had left behind. The fake Scandinavian loungers, the gaudy faux rustic signage, the security camera wires they'd run through my window frame. Every time I found another stupid Serenity Stone or a community values poster, I dumped it straight into the burn barrel. The house itself had held up better than I thought. Structurally, it was still mine. The bones I'd laid with my own hands years ago. The floors needed refinishing, and the fireplace had some smoke damage from someone's idiotic attempt to enhance the mountain mood with eucalyptus-scented logs, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. Ian helped me rewire the security system. Camille gave me the name of a contractor who specialized in undoing HOA improvements. We stripped out the synthetic sauna and tore down the platform deck they'd added without permits. I found my original kitchen table in a storage unit Karen had rented under a fake name. Still had the scorch mark from that 4th of July when I'd set a coffee pot on it too early in the morning. I kept the mark. Word spread fast, even beyond the state. A regional news crew did a spotlight segment on the retreat that wasn't. I got an email from a congressional staffer in Denver asking for a call. Apparently, the scope of the HOA's fraud had sparked something bigger, a review of how associations claim abandoned properties and whether state law offers enough protection to absentee owners. Camille and I drove down to a town hall meeting in Boulder, where I spoke briefly about what happened. I kept it simple, just facts, no flair. But when I mentioned the HOA forged a trust deed and used it to evict my life, well, the crowd didn't stay quiet. They asked questions, so many that we ran an hour over time. By the end of the week, a state senator introduced what he called the Jennings Amendment, a bill that would require judicial oversight for any HOA action involving claims of abandonment, trust management, or third-party rental operations. It didn't undo what had happened to me, but it meant the next guy like me wouldn't have to go through hell just to get back his front door. Meanwhile, letters kept coming. Other homeowners from Texas, Oregon, even Florida, writing to say they'd faced something similar. A few had already launched lawsuits. One woman said her HOA tried to repossess her backyard shed for being underutilized. I wrote back to every single one. Some I helped connect with Camille. Others just needed to know they weren't crazy. One day, I found a stack of Karen's old retreat journals that someone had forgotten in a closet. Pages filled with fake guest reviews, vision board clippings, and one truly delusional entry labeled long-term strategy, Alpine expansion. I tossed it all in the fire pit. As flames curled up the edges of her nonsense, I poured myself a bourbon, sat on my porch, and watched the sun dip behind the ridge. The stars came out fast and clear, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was defending something. I felt like I had already won. 6 months later, my house smelled like pine wood, coffee, and old leather again. Not eucalyptus, not lavender, not that sterile resort clean scent they pumped through the vents when strangers paid $200 a night to sleep in my bed. Just mine. The court-appointed trustees finished liquidating Alpine Bluff's assets. My full restitution came in. Every cent of the $3.7 million judgment. I used exactly none of it on luxury. Most went to legal bills, some to restoring the land, and a big chunk into a fund for homeowners fighting rogue HOAs. Camille helped me set that up. We called it Hollow Pines Defense, after the old tree at the edge of my property that somehow survived a decade of blizzards and one bad chainsaw incident. Karen Sargent. She's in the Colorado Department of Corrections now, serving her 18-year sentence in a medium security facility near Cannon City. Her LinkedIn is gone. Her house is gone. So's the yoga retreat dream. I got an anonymous letter once. No return address, just 6 words written on lined paper. You should have just stayed gone. It made me laugh. I framed it. The Jennings Amendment passed with bipartisan support. By the following spring, it was state law. No HOA in Colorado could ever again assume ownership of unoccupied private property without a court order, and all such actions had to go through a public registry. Some counties were even adding QR codes to utility meters so that any management claims could be flagged and challenged in real time. Camille called it anti-Karen tech. I liked it. I started writing again. First, a few short stories, then a full-length book, My Mountain, My Rules, and Prison for the HOA. It hit number 4 on the nonfiction bestseller list the week it came out. I did interviews, podcasts, even one daytime talk show where they asked if I ever considered turning the story into a movie. I told them they couldn't afford the casting budget for the HOA board. Too many villains, too few actors. But I didn't write it for fame. I wrote it because somewhere out there, another quiet guy with calloused hands and no HOA dues is coming home to a locked gate and strangers sleeping in his kitchen. And he deserves to know there's a way to win. The snow came early this year. I was splitting firewood behind the cabin when I saw a Subaru stop at the foot of my road. 2 people got out, read the metal sign by the fence, then slowly turned around. No photos, no confrontation, just gone. I looked up at the hills. Breathed deep. For once, there was nothing coming down the trail but weather. So I went inside, poured another coffee, and opened my laptop. First line of the new book. If you're reading this, and someone's renting your house without your permission, don't call customer service. Call a lawyer, then call me.